Okay, so I've decided that I'm not going to read the whole chapters. I'm going to read about two parts to each chapter. I'm not going to read the end of the chapter, so I encourage you to get this book for free on Kindle or order it online for $5 or $10. The goal of this, if you have read this or if you do like this, I encourage you even more to write an Amazon review and tell somebody about this because the goal of this is to get a regular book contract in a regular book. Um, when I first started working on this book, minus 5,000 hours of the work I put into it, I had a college professor read a early draft of it, and I said, "Is this good enough to be in a bookstore?" And she said, "No, it's not good enough to be in a bookstore." And that was something that really hurt me. But she was telling the truth. But she didn't know how the type of work fortitude I have. I was gonna work on this and redo it and edit it and redo it and edit it and edit it and edit it until I got it right, until it just flowed naturally and until it was very well good enough to be in a bookstore. So, all right, so I continue with chapter 5, coke addiction, pill poppers, and police officers. When I got to the lake, I drove about 2 miles per hour down a dirt road until I couldn't go anymore. I hadn't slept outside in a couple years, and it took a while to get used to it. I went from going to bed to the sounds of police sirens and lowriders' car bass to owl hoots and coyote howls. The most important thing was to quit cocaine. It was going to be painful, but if anyone could beat a crack addiction cold turkey, it was me. During the middle of the night, I felt sick to my stomach and threw up my filthiness like an inmate on his deathbed. The morning couldn't get there fast enough. I needed a warm bed and a little encouragement, but I couldn't think of anyone that would have me. When the sun came up, I instinctively started driving back to San Antonio, determined not to go back to the neighborhood I found my crack addiction, but figuring that if I hung around the north side long enough, I'd find someone to help me. I got off I-35 and drove to Brook Hollow Library. It was my childhood hangout, about 2.5 mile walk from our house growing up, about 6 miles about 6 miles. But we didn't have much else to do, and we made the trip hundreds of times. I remember that it had the coldest, best tasting tap water we ever had. At home, we had to sometimes we only had access to the bathroom sink. The library is where we'd escape. It didn't matter if we were hiding from bullies, cops, or our father. We could always go to the library. Old habits are hard to break, and I felt a lot safer sitting in my van at the library than I did getting eaten alive by bugs at the lake. I fit in at the library with my oversized backpack and schoolboy hair. By the end of the day, I spotted a librarian giving me notice while I read the paper. She looked like a recent college grad, pumped up about being a librarian. She was modern and spunky with short spiked hair, no makeup, and trendy clothes. Probably a lesbian. I'd been there all day, and after I saw her looking at me, I got worried she was going to ask me to leave. So I went up to her and asked her about the internet. "I want to see if I can get money for college," I said. "Have you ever been to college?" she asked. "No." "Did you graduate from high school?" "I got my GED," I told her. She showed me how to get online and spent the next 2 hours helping me fill out the proper forms for getting financial aid. "I don't do this for everyone," she said, "but I can tell you're smart." I left the library and felt more human. I wasn't thinking about cocaine. I was thinking about getting my life together and someday going to college. The librarian gave me more encouragement in 2 hours than I had had in the previous 6 years. I had that feeling you get when you call your mom from a payphone on a long road trip, like someone actually cares. I got back on I-35 in a better mood and drove to the first Exxon Tiger Mart I saw. Tiger Marts have clean restrooms with locking doors. They're perfect when you're homeless and you need to brush your teeth, wash your face, or clean your feet. After taking a bird bath, I parked behind the gas station's dumpster and went to sleep early. The next morning, I woke up to a late model Ford Econoline van pulling in front of the trash bin where I'd made camp. Its occupants jumped out in an exuberant mood. They were wearing University of Texas garb, on their way to some sort of UT sporting event. I crouched down in the back of my van in shame while they emptied their trash. This is good, huh? I'm not going to be denied. I won't be denied. I spent the hours and hours doing this. I'll do push-ups all day. I won't be denied. I'll read this over and over and make 100 videos of this. The next morning I woke up. I saw the regalia as a sign that I needed to get to Austin. I'd be safer and I'd have much more fun beating a coke addiction in a city that I actually enjoyed living in. I didn't have to live in San Antonio just because that's where I'm from. That lesson took a while to learn. I hit the interstate, and in an hour I was in Travis County. Not thinking about my past, I stopped grasping the city I was from like I needed it for air. I thought about what the librarian said. I stayed positive and concentrated on how I could make my future better with college. When I got to Austin, I parked my van a couple blocks from campus and spent the day walking around UT. Later that evening, I went in Adobe Mall and sat outside their movie theater. Looking out the second story window at the attractive kids below, I admired their squeaky clean looks and fashionable clothes. I was the same age as them, but I felt like a younger outsider with nothing but an unusual story and background. I sat at the window for hours until there wasn't anyone on the street outside, only a few drag rats scurrying around for vacant holes to crawl in. All the well-dressed college students I was watching earlier had gone back to their dorms, smoky co-ops, and luxury apartments. It was getting late and I worried about finding a place to park my van. I had just enough gas to get up to a rest stop south of town and back to Austin in the morning for day labor. I figured it was my best bet and I hit I-35. When I got past downtown, I pulled over to a Chevron gas station to put air in my tires. I was standing outside my van by the air machine when a cop pulled up behind me and flicked his lights. I gave him a friendly wave like everything was okay, but he didn't get out of his car. He made me nervous, so I lifted the hood and pretended like I was messing with the hoses. It wasn't smart, and I accidentally took off a belt that was attached to 6 or 7 different mechanical devices. I figured I'd put it back together after the cop left, but when he did, I couldn't get it back on to save my life. A truck with Arkansas plates pulled over, and a sickly 4-foot little man in a leather jacket got out. He looked like a ghoul from a Lemony Snicket novel. He gave me a phony smile, showing me his baked bean teeth. Then a lanky prostitute jumped out of the truck in high heels and a neon pink miniskirt. She looked like she'd just come from a 1980s themed horror convention in Times Square. She smacked her gum and asked what was going on, to which he replied, "Get back in there!" He took a look at my engine and immediately diagnosed the problem. "Your full-range Glux capacitor belt is out." "Full-range Glux capacitor belt?" I asked. It sounded familiar. "Yeah, it connects the electricity to the gas," he said. "Don't you know anything?" "Oh, okay. How much to fix it?" "Well, I can go get the part about a mile away. It costs about $20. He had a southern accent which reminded me of JD, so I took a chance and gave him my last $20. I told him it was my last 20 and even showed him the inside of my wallet. He acted insulted, but I wanted to make sure he understood the situation. I wanted him to know that if he ripped me off, he'd be taking a man's last $20. I figured that nobody could sleep after doing something like that. I was wrong. I patiently waited for a few hours before the gas station clerk came outside and asked me what was going on. "I'm okay," I told him. "Gluck's capacitor went out, but someone's on their way to get me a new one." He looked at me confused before busting out laughing. "I ain't never heard of a Glux capacitor, but a flux capacitor is from a movie," he said with a chuckle. "I hope you get back to 1985, Marty McFly." "What are you talking about?" "The flux capacitor is a fictional time-traveling device from the Back to the Future movie," he said. "You know, from the 1980s. Whoever went to go get you one ain't coming back, and if he does, he'll probably have that wild-eyed scientist with him," the clerk said, laughing. I was never going to see my money again, but I pretty much knew that. I'm an optimist, and I was trying to buy an easy way out when God obviously wanted me to fix the van myself. After a few hours of tinkering, I somehow figured out that the belt that I screwed up was supposed to be attached to the alternator, the power steering block, and a few other unknown complicated looking devices. I once saw a TV show where the character used a pair of pantyhose in place of an automotive belt, so I walked to the closest H-E-B and bought some cheap pantyhose with the change in my ashtray. When I got back to the van, I tried to fit the pantyhose where the belt would have been. I'd start off vertical at the top of the hood and wrap the hose around all the various attachments before crawling under the van and hooking it up to everything else. I was at it for a few hours, covered in dirt and oil, when I snagged my hand on a piece of loose metal and blood started squirting everywhere as I screamed like a banshee. I closed my eyes and laid under my van covered in a mix of blood, oil, and sweat. The manager of the gas station eventually came right up before he was out for his morning shift. "Any luck?" he asked. "No, not yet." "I heard you've been here all night." "I'm trying to fix my van," I said assertively. 20 minutes before I call the cops," he said, more assertively. I had to get out of there before the cops towed my van and I went to jail. I didn't have money to get my van out of tow or me out of jail, and me nor the van were even registered. I didn't have insurance, a place of residence, or even a valid driver's license. What I did have was a tad of pot and a bunch of unpaid traffic warnings. I was so tired it was like tripping acid. But I kept working on the van until the sun peeked out on the horizon. A few minutes later, I started to play out what I was going to say when the cops got there and started laughing. I hardly ever laugh, so when I do, it's kind of a monumental event. My task suddenly seemed much easier, and I somehow managed to rig the pantyhose around the alternator and fan. I could get the van to start, but I couldn't get it over 20 miles per hour, so I drove on the access road with my emergencies on. I only made it a few miles before it overheated, and I pulled over and walked to the next side of the highway HEB. I found a quarter on the ground and used it in their generic soda machine. It accidentally gave me 2 sodas for the price of one, and I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. I drank both slowly, savoring their sparkling goodness. After the van cooled, I got back on the road but only had enough gas to make it about 10 miles. I figured I'd be forced to panhandle when it ran out, and I avoid panhandling like diet soda. A few occasions I've tried it, but I always feel like a jerk and wish I wouldn't have bothered. I made it to the HEB in Kyle, but I didn't see many people there I felt like asking for money from, so I hung out in the employee smoking section for the rest of the day. After it got dark, I struck up a conversation with a stoner-looking cashier. We shot the shit for 20 minutes. I told him my story, and he gave me $5 and a half a pack of Marlboro Lights. On the next leg, I made it through San Marcos and into New Braunfels. The van started smoking like crazy, so I pulled over, popped open the hood, and found my Jimmy-rigged pantyhose burnt crisp. I had no money, and unless I could get some pantyhose or a new belt, my van wasn't leaving the side of that highway. I didn't have any better ideas, so I locked the van and started walking 30 miles to San Antonio, like an idiot. After the third mile, I felt exhausted, going on little food and sleep. I went to a store on the side of the highway to use their bathroom and try to steal some candy, and I saw some straggling looking guys coming out with a case of beer. They were talking about day labor, and I realized I didn't have to walk all the way to San Antonio. New Braunfels had a day labor place just like San Antonio. I got some directions and walked to the day labor place in the middle of the night. They were closed, but there were a few riffraffs loitering out front. They were waiting for them to open, brazenly getting drunk. I'm interested in work, I said. Got any here? You got ID and social security card, they asked. Yeah, I got that, I told them. Show up tomorrow and they'll let you work, they said. I went back to my van and found a dinted can of beans, pried it open, and ate it like Popeye. I was still hungry and searching for food when I found an old foil pipe with a pinch of half-burnt weed in it. After I got stoned, I realized my problems weren't as bad as I thought. I laughed, turned up my portable radio, and fell asleep to oldies music. I walked back to the day labor place before sunrise when they forced me to watch the local news with all the other penniless tramps. They finally ordered me a job working on a roof of a local high school next to the freeway. It was in the sun with no shade for minimum wage. I worked on the roof, dripping with sweat and intermittently wiping my brow to stare down the freeway toward Austin, imagining what life would be like if I was rushing to class at Texas State or UT. When the boss man caught my wool gathering, he snarled me something fierce. By the end of the day, I made enough money for a belt for my van, and I convinced another day laborer to help me put it on. Within a few hours, I'd spent almost all of my day's wages, but my van was up and running. I got back on the highway and headed toward San Antonio, but my mood turned sour the second I got back. I told myself I should have just stayed in Austin. Within a couple hours, I was depressed and sweating my ass off with nothing to do. I only saw the negative and needed some weed to calm my ass down and make me feel better. I didn't know where to buy less than a quarter pound, but Benny had told me about a pizza joint in the strip mall that sold 20 cents. I only had $10 left from day labor, but I went there anyways, figuring I'd talk them into selling me a dime. The pizza place was owned by a young guy in his late 20s named Kenny. Kenny was from a middle-class family with loving parents. I'd met him a year earlier when Benny and I had helped put flyers on his then yet-to-exist pizza place on his neighbor's stores. He made the flyers at the public library and baked the pizzas at his mom's kitchen. Kenny was a former Papa John's driver, inspired by the worker-to-owner story of the company's founder. He was a talkative pothead who loved the Beatles, Jesus, and NBA basketball. He came from a Jehovah's Witness background, but Kenny basically followed his own idea of Christianity. He didn't attend church, but he spoke about Jesus every chance he got. If he wasn't babbling about Christ, he'd be going on about how great the Beatles, the Spurs, or Hank Williams was. The worst thing about Kenny was his wife, Betty. She was a mess of a woman who spoke like she'd been raised on at a Tijuana truck stop men's room. Kenny was passive and well-read, but Betty was loud and illiterate. They had a phony marriage that had something to do with how they got the startup money for the pizza parlor. They didn't even really like each other. Their relationship, based on lies, was depressing. Betty would verbally emasculate Kenny in front of his friends and customers. She'd talk about things like him masturbating in a bubble bath and make everyone uncomfortable. Then she'd say something even more outrageous like, Kenny likes being spanked while wearing women's underwear. And the room would feel very awkward. The cops knew they sold weed and would park right across the street every afternoon. When I got there that day, Kenny didn't remember me and I hadn't ever met Betty before, so they thought I was there to buy a pizza. This was supposed to be a place of business, so I didn't ask for the weed right away. I chewed the fat while Kenny tossed pizza dough. Kenny did most of the talking in just about every conversation he ever had. Our conversation was no different. He excitedly told me how he was going to turn the dirtiest restaurant I'd ever seen into a top-of-the-line pizza parlor. I was surprised the health department even let them stay open. Their place was a dump. There was hardly any light and it smelled bad, and there weren't any bright signs. Not even a cheap, locally made canvas one or even one made at home from cardboard. We wanted to keep a low profile, Betty would always say. Their counter was made of rotted wood they pulled from the dumpster. The place looked like it belonged in a third world country. Only thing that they had somewhat resembling a regular pizza shop, was a commercial oven he got from a strip club that was going out of business. I spent the next 4 hours in Kenny's fake restaurant. By the time it got dark, they offered me an under-the-table job delivering pizzas. He said I could help them put flyers on hotel doors during the daytime hours when there weren't any pies to deliver, and Betty said I could help her sell weed while I delivered the pizzas. I accepted their offer, and the three of us celebrated with cold beer, mushroom pizza, and a super fat joint. When it got late, I started to head to my parking lot to sleep in my van, but Betty insisted I sleep inside on the restaurant floor. At first, I thought I'd be bunking by myself, but then I saw Betty grab their pillows, blankets, and sheets and realized they both slept here too. We each found a spot on the grungy floor, and Betty hit the lights. 20 minutes later, we heard a slight tap on the door. Betty sighed like she'd been through this before, got up off the floor, and clicked the lights back on. It was the neighborhood bum, also named Kenny, who'd stolen my wallet when I was 16, and the same Kenny crackhead I'd spent a memorable night with by the railroad tracks years earlier. Kenny and Betty had been letting homeless Kenny sleep inside their pizza place. Before that, the guy was sleeping in the ditch across the street. Kenny and Betty were decent people and felt sorry for him. After they let the drug addict Kenny in the parlor, he acted like he didn't remember me and chatted away with the pizza place owner Kenny. So I didn't bring up any old times. I was in too good of a mood. In a matter of hours, I'd scored some weed, a job, and a pizza place to live at. That was a from chapter 5 from my book, Gonzo Education by Gregory Brandt. It's available free on Kindle, and you can get it on Amazon. I think it's like $5 or $6. Help me out. I know you enjoyed that right there. If you watched the whole video, you know that's really good. Send it to one person, click the thumbs up button, and go ahead and write an Amazon review. Tell them how much you like it. I really appreciate that. Have a good day, and I love you.